In the dusty streets of Shiloh Falls, a desperate little girl's plea to a wealthy stranger would change 3 lives forever. Daisy Harper had watched her mother Clara work their failing homestead until her hands bled, watched the bank notices pile up like autumn leaves, watched hope fade from her mama's eyes with each passing day. When Royce Copper Callahan rolled into town in his gleaming carriage, silver coins jingling in his pockets, and 15 years of buried guilt weighing on his shoulders, Daisy saw something the adults missed. Beneath his expensive suit and cold businessman stare lived the kind ranch hand who once shared their table and Clara's dreams. But would the man who abandoned them when times got hard be willing to risk his fortune to save the family he left behind? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Harper homestead, painting the weathered fence posts in shades of amber and rust. Clara Harper stood at her kitchen window, watching the light creep across the parched earth that had once been her pride and joy. Her calloused fingers traced the simple gold wedding band she still wore, a habit that had become as natural as breathing in the 7 years since Thomas had passed. The ring caught the light, reminding her of better days when this land had promised abundance rather than heartache. The kitchen around her told the story of gradual decline. Where once mason jars filled with preserves had lined the shelves, now only a few remained, their contents carefully rationed. The cast-iron stove that had been Thomas's wedding gift still functioned, but the wood box beside it held precious few logs. Every piece of fuel had to be earned through back-breaking labor or purchased with coins she could barely spare. "Mama, the chickens are acting strange again." Daisy's voice carried through the screen door, accompanied by the sound of small boots scraping against the wooden porch. At 10 years old, the girl had inherited her mother's resilience and her father's stubborn optimism, though lately Clara worried that life was teaching her daughter harsh lessons too early. Clara turned from the window, smoothing her worn apron. "Strange how, sweet pea?" Daisy pushed through the door, her tattered cloth doll tucked securely under one arm. The doll, once bright blue with yellow yarn hair, now showed the gentle wearer of constant companionship. Clara had made it during her pregnancy, stitching love and hope into every scene. Now it served as Daisy's anchor in an increasingly uncertain world. "They keep looking toward the road like they're expecting someone," Daisy explained, settling the doll carefully on the kitchen table. "And old Henrietta won't lay. She just sits in her box, making worried, clucking sounds." Clara managed to smile, despite the weight pressing on her chest. Even the chickens sensed the tension that had settled over their small world like morning fog. The bank notice folded in her apron pocket seemed to pulse with every heartbeat, a constant reminder that their time here was measured in days rather than months. "Animals know things we don't sometimes," Clara said, pulling ingredients for breakfast from their dwindling supplies. "Your daddy used to say they could smell change on the wind." The mention of Thomas brought the familiar ache, but also a warmth that still sustained her. He had been a good man, patient and kind, who had taken on a widow and her heart full of old wounds. When Clara had arrived in Shiloh Falls 16 years ago, she had been running from memories of another man, another life that had ended in abandonment and broken promises. Thomas Harper had offered stability, friendship, and eventually a gentle love that had healed much of the damage. He had never asked about the ranch hand who had courted her before their marriage, the one who had filled her head with dreams of silver strikes and fortune before disappearing like morning mist. Thomas had simply been present, steady as the sunrise, until consumption had taken him far too soon. "Tell me again about when you and Daddy first came here," Daisy requested, climbing onto her chair and arranging her doll with careful precision. This morning ritual had become their shield against worry, a way to remember better times when the future had seemed secure. Clara began cracking their last 3 eggs into the iron skillet. the sizzle filling the quiet kitchen. Well, your daddy saw potential in this land that nobody else could see. The previous owner had given up after 2 bad seasons, but Thomas walked these fence lines and said he could feel the promise in the soil. She had learned to love this place through Thomas's eyes, to see possibility where others saw hardship. He had been right about the land's potential. For several good years, their crops had flourished, their small herd had grown, and Clara had allowed herself to believe in permanence again. He built that chicken coop with his own hands, Clara continued, flipping the eggs with practiced ease. Took him 3 tries to get it right because he kept making it too fancy. Said our hens deserved better than a plain old box. Daisy giggled, a sound that never failed to lift Clara's spirits. And then Henrietta moved in and acted like she owned the place, just like she still does. Clara divided the eggs between 2 plates, adding slices of bread toasted over the stove's heat. The portions were smaller than they used to be, but she made sure Daisy's plate held the larger share dot as they ate. Clara's mind wandered to the broader troubles facing Shiloh Falls. The town had been built on optimism and the promise of the railroad, but when the tracks had been routed 20 miles north, businesses had begun to fail. The general store's shelves grew emptier each month. The saloon had closed last winter, and families had packed up their dreams along with their belongings. Only the stubborn and the desperate remained, and Clara counted herself among both categories. This land held Thomas's sweat and dreams, Daisy's first steps, and countless memories. The thought of losing it felt like losing him all over again. Mrs. Patterson stopped by yesterday while you were mending the south fence, Clara said, trying to keep her voice casual. She mentioned seeing a fancy carriage on the main road. Said whoever was in it looked like they had more money than sense. Daisy perked up with the curiosity that made her both delightful and occasionally troublesome. A fancy carriage? Like the ones in my storybooks? Something like that. Clara had heard the whispers around town, speculation about outside investors and railroad surveyors. Change was coming to Shiloh Falls, whether they wanted it or not, and experience had taught her that change rarely favored the powerless. After breakfast, Clara sent Daisy to tend the chickens while she tackled the morning chores. The routine was both blessing and burden endless tasks that kept her hands busy but couldn't quiet her racing thoughts. She mended a section of fence with salvaged wire, knowing it was a temporary fix for a permanent problem. She weeded the vegetable garden, coaxing life from soil that seemed as tired as she felt by mid-morning. The heat had become oppressive, promising another scorching day. Clara paused in her work to wipe sweat from her brow, gazing across the land. That had become both sanctuary and prison. The mortgage payments that had once seemed manageable now loomed like mountains, and Thomas's life insurance had long since been depleted by medical bills and failed crops. She pulled the bank notice from her pocket, unfolding the crisp paper with trembling fingers. The words hadn't changed since yesterday, or the day before. 30 days to bring the account current or face foreclosure proceedings. The amount might as well have been $30,000 for all the hope she had of raising it. "Mama, come quick," Daisy's excited voice carried across the yard. "There's a dust cloud coming up the road, and it's bigger than anything." Clara shaded her eyes against the sun, squinting toward the main road that connected their property to town. Sure enough, a cloud of dust rose in the distance, moving with the purposeful speed of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Her heart began to race with the familiar anxiety that accompanied unexpected visitors. In her experience, people who arrived unannounced rarely brought good news. As the dust cloud drew closer, Clara could make out the outline of a carriage, not the simple farm wagon or modest buggy that typically graced these roads, but something that belonged in the city. The vehicle was black and gleaming, pulled by a matched pair of horses that spoke of careful breeding and expensive feed. Daisy ran to her mother's side. clutching her doll with one arm while shading her own eyes with the other. "It's like something from a fairy tale, Mama. Do you think there's a prince inside?" Clara's mouth went dry as childhood memories stirred unbidden. She had once known someone who had dreamed of carriages like this, who had spun tales of the fortune he would make and the fine things he would buy. But that was another lifetime, before disappointment had taught her the difference between dreams and reality. The carriage turned onto their lane, wheels crushing the dried grass with an authority that seemed almost violent. Clara instinctively moved closer to Daisy, her protective instincts sharpening, as they always did when strangers approached their isolated home. As the vehicle drew to a stop near their front gate, Clara caught her first glimpse of the driver, a hired man in a neat uniform who sat with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to serving wealth. But it was the passenger emerging from the carriage's interior who made Clara's world tilt sideways. 15 years had changed him, adding silver to his temples and lines around his eyes. But she would have recognized Royce Callahan anywhere. He stepped down from the carriage with the careful grace of a man who had learned to carry himself differently, his clothes speaking of success and careful grooming. The rough edges that had once made him dangerously appealing had been smoothed away, replaced by the polished confidence of someone who had found his place in the world. Their eyes met across the dusty yard, and Clara saw the exact moment when recognition dawned in his gaze. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, something that might have been longing, before settling into the carefully neutral mask of a successful businessman. Clara. His voice carried the same warm timbre she remembered, though it now held notes of education and refinement that had been absent in his younger days. Copper. The old nickname slipped out before she could stop it, a remnant of intimacy that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. She had called him that because of his reddish-brown hair and his dreams of striking it rich in the copper mines. Looking at him now, dressed in fine clothes and stepping out of an expensive carriage, it seemed those dreams had finally come true. Daisy looked between them with the sharp intelligence that made her both Clara's pride and worry. Even at 10, she could sense the undercurrents of adult emotion, the weight of history, hanging in the air like smoke from a distant fire. "This is my daughter, Daisy," Clara said, placing a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. She didn't elaborate on the timing, didn't explain that Daisy had been born 2 years after Copper's departure, during the brief, sweet period when Thomas had made her believe in happiness again. Copper's gaze softened as he looked at Daisy, and Clara saw a flicker of the man she had once known. "Hello, Daisy. You have your mother's eyes." "Are you the prince from the fancy carriage?" Daisy asked with a directness that often made Clara cringe and smile simultaneously. A genuine laugh escaped Copper's lips, the first unguarded sound he had made. "No, little one. Just a man who used to live around these parts, coming back to see how things have changed." "Everything's changed," Daisy said matter-of-factly. "Mama says change comes whether you want it or not, like weather or growing up or chickens getting old and stopping their laying." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks at her daughter's unfiltered honesty, but Copper nodded seriously, as if considering the wisdom in Daisy's words. "Your daughter is very wise," he said to Clara, and something in his tone suggested he meant more than the simple compliment implied. The moment stretched between them, filled with 15 years of unfinished conversations and unasked questions. Clara found herself cataloging the changes in his face, the way success had altered his posture and softened his hands. This was not the calloused ranch hand who had kissed her under the cottonwood trees and promised to come back rich enough to give her the world. This was a stranger wearing Copper's face, and Clara wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or heartbroken. The foreclosure notice arrived 3 days after Copper's unexpected visit, delivered by a nervous bank clerk who couldn't meet Clara's eyes as he pressed the official document into her trembling hands. She stood in the doorway, watching the young man hurry back to his horse, as if her misfortune might be contagious. Clara waited until his dust had settled before unfolding the paper, though she already knew what it would say. The words swam before her eyes, legal terminology that boiled down to a simple, devastating truth: 30 days to pay the full amount owed, or lose everything Thomas had built for them. She sank onto the porch steps, the notice fluttering in her lap like a trapped bird. The numbers on the page represented more than she could earn in 2 years, even if the land produced a miracle harvest. The reality of their situation crashed over her with the force of a summer storm, leaving her breathless and shaking. "Mama?" Daisy's voice came from behind the screen door, small and worried. "Are you crying?" Clara quickly wiped her eyes, folding the notice and tucking it into her apron pocket where it seemed to burn against her hip. "Just dust in my eyes, sweet pea. Come help me with the garden before it gets too hot." But Daisy had inherited her father's intuitive nature, along with his stubborn streak. She pushed through the door and settled beside Clara on the steps, studying her mother's face with the intensity of someone far older than her years. "It's about money, isn't it?" Daisy asked quietly. "The paper that man brought?" Clara's chest tightened at the matter-of-fact way her daughter spoke about their troubles. No 10-year-old should have to worry about such things. But poverty had a way of stealing childhood innocence, whether parents tried to protect it or not. "We'll figure something out," Clara said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "We always do. Like when the well went dry last summer, and you worked extra shifts at Mrs. Patterson's until we could afford to dig deeper. Exactly like that." Clara pulled Daisy closer, breathing in the scent of sunshine and innocence that still clung to her daughter's hair. "The Harper women are fighters, remember? We don't give up easy." But even as she spoke the words, Clara felt them ring hollow. This wasn't a matter of working extra shifts or stretching supplies. This was about losing the only home Daisy had ever known, the land that held Thomas's memory and their entire future. That afternoon, while Daisy napped in the heat, Clara walked the property boundaries with desperate purpose. She examined every fence post, every struggling crop, every improvement Thomas had made with his own hands. Surely there was something she could sell, some asset she had overlooked. The barn held nothing of value beyond basic tools and equipment, all of it necessary for their survival. The livestock consisted of aging chickens and a milk cow whose best days were behind her. Even if she sold everything, it wouldn't cover a fraction of what they owed. Clara found herself standing in the middle of the south pasture, surrounded by the dreams she and Thomas had shared. He had planned to expand their herd, to build a proper dairy operation that would provide steady income. Those plans lay buried with him in the Shiloh Falls Cemetery, alongside the future they had been building together. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her brooding. Clara shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun, expecting to see a neighbor, or perhaps another unwelcome visit from the bank. Instead, she watched Copper ride toward her on a fine bay horse, his posture as confident in the saddle as it had been. Stepping out of his carriage, he dismounted several yards away, showing the same careful respect for boundaries that he had demonstrated during his previous visit. Clara appreciated the gesture, even as she resented needing it. "I heard about the foreclosure notice," he said without preamble. News travels fast in a small town. Clara's cheeks burned with humiliation. Bad enough to lose everything, worse to have the whole community witness her failure. "I suppose it does. I also heard you turned down help from the church fund and Mrs. Patterson's offer to take in washing. We're not charity cases." The words came out sharper than she intended, born from pride that had become both her shield and her weakness. Studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "No, you're not. But you're also not going to save this place through stubbornness alone. And what would you suggest?" Clara's voice carried years of frustration and fear. "Should I beg? Should I throw myself on the mercy of men who see dollar, signs where my family sees home? You should let me help." The simple statement hung between them like a bridge Clara wasn't sure she could cross. Help from Copper would come with complications she wasn't prepared to face, memories and emotions she had worked years to bury. "I don't need your pity," she said. "It's not pity." Copper stepped closer, his voice gentling. "Clara, I know what this land means to you. I know what Thomas built here, what you've sacrificed to keep it going. Let me do something right for once." The reference to their past hung unspoken but present, a ghost that had haunted Clara through marriage, motherhood, and widowhood. She had never asked why he left, never demanded explanations or apologies. Some wounds were too deep for words. Why now? She asked. Why come back after all this time? Copper's expression grew complicated, shadows passing across his features, like clouds over the sun. Because I finally have something to offer. Because I've spent 15 years trying to become worthy of the dreams I abandoned here. Before Clara could respond, the sound of running feet interrupted them. Daisy appeared over the rise, her doll bouncing against her hip as she ran toward them with the urgency of a child bearing important news. "Mama! Mama! There's men at the house!" she called, her voice high with excitement rather than fear. "They've got papers, and they want to talk to you about selling." Clara's blood turned to ice water. She had heard about land speculators circling dying homesteads like vultures, offering pennies on the dollar for property they could flip to railroad companies or Eastern investors. The thought of strangers walking through Thomas's house, calculating the value of their desperation, made her sick. Copper was already moving toward his horse. "I'll ride back with you?" "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is." His tone brooked no argument. "Clara, you don't know what kind of men you're dealing with. Let me at least make sure they treat you with respect." The ride back to the house felt like a march to execution. Clara could see the black carriage parked beside her modest home, its presence as ominous as a storm cloud. 2 men in city suits stood on her porch, examining the structure with the cold assessment of buyers at a livestock auction. Daisy ran ahead, clutching her doll tighter as she sensed the adult tension surrounding these visitors. Clara dismounted from Copper's horse, straightening her shoulders and preparing for another battle she couldn't afford to lose. The older of the 2 men stepped forward, removing his hat with practiced courtesy. "Mrs. Harper? I'm Samuel Garrett, from Kansas City Land Development. This is my associate, Mr. Wells. We understand you might be interested in discussing the sale of your property." "I'm not interested in selling," Clara said firmly. "Perhaps you should hear our offer before making that decision," Garrett suggested smoothly. "We're prepared to pay fair market value, which would be sufficient to settle your outstanding debts, and leave you with a tidy sum for relocation." The casual mention of her debts made Clara's face burn. These men had done their homework, knew exactly how desperate her situation had become. They were counting on her desperation to make her compliant. "The lady said she's not interested." Copper's voice carried an authority. That made both men turn to assess this new player in their game. Garrett's eyes sharpened as he took in Copper's expensive clothes and confident bearing. "And you are?" "Someone who has the lady's best interests at heart." Copper's tone was pleasant enough, but Clara heard the steel beneath the silk. "Well, perhaps you can help her see reason." Wells spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a nasal quality that grated on Clara's nerves. "This property is going into foreclosure regardless. She can walk away with something, or lose everything to the bank. Get off my land." Clara's voice shook with fury. "Both of you, right now." Garrett's facade of courtesy slipped slightly. "Mrs. Harper, you're being emotional about a business decision. We're offering you a lifeline." "You're offering to profit from my misery," Clara shot back. "There's a difference." The 2 men exchanged a look that spoke of practiced manipulation and disappointed expectations. They had expected to find a desperate widow, easy prey for their schemes. Instead, they had encountered a woman with backbone and an unexpected ally. "Our offer stands through the end of the week," Garrett said, placing his hat back on his head. "After that, you'll be dealing with the bank, and they won't be nearly as generous." Clara watched them climb into their carriage and drive away, her hands shaking with residual anger and fear. The encounter had crystallized everything she stood to lose, not just the land and house, but her dignity and independence. "Mama, why? Were those men so mean?" Daisy asked, appearing at Clara's side with the uncanny timing children possessed for asking difficult questions. "Because some people think money is more important than anything else," Clara replied, smoothing her daughter's hair with trembling fingers. "Is that why the cowboy came back?" Daisy's innocent question hit closer to home than Clara was prepared for. "Because he has money now?" Clara glanced at Copper, who had remained diplomatically silent during the exchange with the land speculators. His presence had bolstered her courage, but it also raised questions she wasn't ready to confront. "I think," Clara said carefully, "that some people need time to figure out what's really important in life." As the sun began to set over the homestead that might soon belong to strangers, Clara realized that her time for avoiding difficult truths was running out. The foreclosure notice in her pocket felt like a ticking clock, counting down to a moment of reckoning that would change all their lives forever. Copper spent the night in Shiloh Falls' only remaining hotel, a two-story building that had seen better days, but still maintained the dignity of frontier hospitality. He lay awake on the narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling while memories played through his mind like scenes from someone else's life. The silver pocket watch Thomas had given him as a wedding gift back when Copper had been best man rather than rival ticked steadily on the knitstand. The engraving read, "To friendship and new beginnings," words that had seemed prophetic then, but now felt like mockery. Thomas had been a good man, better than Copper deserved, and the watch had traveled with him through mining camps and boomtowns, a constant reminder of the life he had walked away from. He pulled the watch from the knitstand, running his thumb over the worn silver surface. 23 minutes past 2 in the morning, and sleep remained elusive. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Clara's face, the mixture of pride and desperation, the way she had stood straighter when those land speculators threatened her dignity. Clara, he remembered, had been softer, more trusting. Life had carved lines around her eyes and calloused her hands, but it had also revealed a strength that took his breath away. She had loved him once, before he had proven himself unworthy of that gift. Copper rose and moved to the window, looking out over the sleeping town. Shiloh Falls had been a thriving community when he left, full of hope and ambitious plans. Now it felt like a place holding its breath, waiting for either salvation or final collapse. He thought about the meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning with the railroad representatives. They wanted to purchase a large tract of land for a new spur line, property that included several struggling homesteads. The commission would be substantial, enough to secure his position with the Kansas City Development Company and open doors to even larger opportunities. But standing in Clara's south pasture, seeing the panic in her eyes when those vultures showed up at her door, Copper had felt something shift inside him. All the success he had accumulated, all the wealth he had earned, seemed hollow compared to the simple dignity of a woman fighting for her family's home. The next morning brought no relief from the summer heat, but Copper dressed carefully in his finest suit and made his way to the railroad meeting. The Kansas City and Western Railroad had set up temporary offices in the town's former newspaper building, and the smell of fresh ink still lingered in the air. James Morrison, the railroad's chief land agent, was a thin man with calculating eyes and the soft hands of someone who had never worked soil or mended fence. He greeted Copper with the hearty enthusiasm of a man closing a profitable deal. "Callahan, good to see you. I trust you've had time to survey the properties we discussed." Copper took the offered seat, accepting coffee that tasted better than anything Shiloh Falls had produced in years. I've looked at most of the parcels. Yes. Excellent. I assume you've identified the holdouts? There are always a few stubborn souls who need extra persuasion to see reason. A casual dismissal of families fighting for their homes grated against Copper's nerves, but he kept his expression neutral. There are several properties where the owners might be reluctant to sell. Morrison waved a dismissive hand. Nothing. That can't be resolved with the proper incentives. Most of these people are barely hanging on anyway. We're doing them a favor by offering them a way out with their dignity intact. And if they refuse? Well, that's why we have foreclosure procedures, isn't it? Morrison's smile was cold as winter wind. Banks are very cooperative when they understand the broader economic benefits of progress. Copper felt his stomach turn. He had spent years learning to navigate the world of business, to see opportunity where others saw only problems. But this conversation stripped away all pretense, revealing the ugly mechanics of how the powerful consumed the weak. There's one property that might present complications, Copper said carefully. The Harper homestead. The widow has strong ties to the community. Ah, yes, Mrs. Harper. Morrison consulted a file thick with documents. We're aware of her situation. Recent foreclosure proceedings should resolve that obstacle shortly. Though, I understand she's been approached by some of our competitors. The casual mention of Clara's private business made Copper's hands clench beneath the table. Competitors? Garrett's outfit from Kansas City. They specialize in acquiring distressed properties for pennies on the dollar, then reselling at significant profit. Quite efficient, actually, though their methods can be somewhat aggressive. Morrison continued talking, outlining timelines and profit projections, but Copper's attention had drifted. He thought about Daisy clutching her worn doll, about Clara's hands trembling as she read the foreclosure notice. These weren't just properties to be acquired. They were homes, dreams, entire lives hanging in the balance. After the meeting, Copper walked Shiloh Falls' dusty streets with new eyes. The empty storefronts and boarded windows weren't just signs of economic decline. They represented families forced to abandon hope, children who would grow up somewhere else because their parents couldn't compete with forces beyond their control. He found himself standing outside the small cemetery where weathered headstones marked the town's brief history. Thomas Harper's grave was easy to locate, marked by a simple stone that read, "Beloved husband and father." Clara had chosen her words carefully, Copper realized. No mention of dates or elaborate sentiments, just the roles that had defined Thomas's life and given it meaning. "I wonder what you'd think of me now, old friend," Copper murmured to the silent stone. "You always said I had too much ambition for my own good." Thomas had been right about many things. He had seen through Copper's grand plans and restless energy to the uncertainty beneath. While Copper had dreamed of striking it rich in distant places, Thomas had understood that real wealth came from putting down roots and nurturing what grew from them. The sound of approaching footsteps made Copper turn. Clara stood at the cemetery's entrance, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. She wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had been mended with careful stitches, and her hair was pinned back with the same practical style he remembered from their youth. "I come every week," she said, joining him beside Thomas's grave. "Daisy thinks I'm being silly, talking to someone who can't answer back." "Thomas always was a good listener," Copper said softly. "Even when we were boys, he had a way of making you feel heard." Clara knelt to place the flowers beside the headstone, her movements reverent and practiced. "He would have liked knowing you came back successful. He always said you'd make something of yourself once you figured out what you really wanted." The words stung because they highlighted how far Copper had strayed from the man Thomas had believed he could become. Success measured in dollars and business deals felt insignificant compared to the legacy Thomas had left, a wife who still honored his memory, a daughter who carried his gentle spirit, a piece of land made better by his presence. "Clara, about yesterday," I don't need your charity, Copper. Her voice was firm but not unkind. Whatever you're thinking of doing, whatever grand gesture you believe, will settle old debts. I can't accept it. It's not charity. He struggled to find words for feelings he barely understood himself. I have more money than I know what to do with, and you're losing everything that matters. How is helping each other charity? Clara stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. Because it comes with strings attached, whether you admit it or not. Because taking help from you means admitting that I can't take care of my own family. Because... Her voice broke slightly. Because you left before, and you'll leave again. The accusation hung between them like a wall neither could easily breach. Copper had no defense against the truth of it, no eloquent argument that could erase 15 years of absence. I was 23 years old and scared, he said finally. I thought I had to prove myself worthy of you before I could offer you anything real. And what makes you think you're worthy now? The question cut deeper than any blade. Copper looked around the cemetery at the markers representing lives fully lived and love freely given, and wondered if accumulating wealth had made him more or less the man Clara had once cared for. Maybe I'm not, he admitted. Maybe I never will be. But Daisy doesn't deserve to suffer because of my mistakes or your pride. Clara's expression softened at the mention of her daughter. Daisy deserves a mother who can provide for her without, depending on what? On someone who cares about both of you? Copper stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. Clara, I'm not asking you to marry me or take me back or pretend the past 15 years didn't happen. I'm asking you to let me help save the only home your daughter has ever known. And what do you get out of it? The question was fair, and Copper considered it seriously. What did he hope to gain? Redemption? Forgiveness? A chance to prove that success hadn't completely corrupted the man he used to be? Maybe I get to sleep through the night without wondering if I could have made a difference, he said. Maybe I get to look at myself in the mirror and see someone Thomas would still recognize. Clara studied his face with the same intensity she had brought to reading the foreclosure notice. You really have changed, not in the ways that matter. I'm still the same restless fool who thought the grass was greener somewhere else. But I've learned the difference between running towards something and running away from it. And which are you doing now? Copper looked down at Thomas's grave, then back at the woman who had shaped his understanding of love and loss. I guess that depends on whether you'll let me stay long enough to find out. Clara's recipe book sat open on the kitchen table, its pages yellowed with age and splattered with the evidence of countless meals prepared with love. The leather binding, cracked from years of use, had been a wedding gift from her own mother. Collection of family recipes passed down through generations of women who understood that feeding people was an act of devotion. She traced her finger along the faded ink of her grandmother's apple pie recipe, remembering Sunday afternoons when the house had filled with the scent of cinnamon and butter. Thomas had loved that pie, claimed it was worth marrying her for, though they both knew the joke held deeper truth. Food had been Clara's way of showing love when words felt inadequate, her method of creating home wherever they landed. Daisy sat across from her, carefully copying letters onto a slate board, her tongue poking out in concentration. The child had inherited her father's methodical nature, along with his earnest desire to please, and Clara felt a familiar pang watching her daughter work so diligently at lessons they couldn't afford to continue much longer. "Mama, why do we have to write everything down?" Daisy asked, pausing in her copying. "Can't we just remember things in our heads?" Clara smiled, closing the recipe book gently. "Because memories fade, sweet pea. But when we write things down, they stay true forever. Like these recipes, they help me remember not just how to make Grandma's biscuits, but what it felt like to stand beside her in the kitchen, learning to measure flour by the handful. Will you teach me to make Grandma's biscuits?" "Of course. But first, let's finish your letters." The morning routine felt precious now, weighted with the knowledge that their days in this kitchen were numbered. Clara had always taken for granted the simple luxury of sitting at their own table, of planning meals from their own stores, of making decisions about their daily life without consulting landlords or benefactors. A knock at the door interrupted her brooding. Through the window, Clara could see Copper standing on the porch, hat in hand and an expression of careful neutrality on his face. He had changed from his business clothes into work pants and a simple cotton shirt, though even his casual attire spoke of quality and care. "Good morning, Clara, Daisy." He nodded to both of them with the formal courtesy that marked all their interactions now. "I was wondering if you might have some work that needs doing around the place." Clara's first instinct was to refuse, but the sight of her broken chicken coop door gave her pause. The latch had been damaged in the last storm, and she lacked both the materials and expertise to repair it properly. The chickens had been wandering freely, making them vulnerable to foxes and other predators. "I suppose the chicken coop could use attention," she said reluctantly, "but I can't pay. I'm not asking for payment." Copper's tone was gentle but firm. "Consider it a favor to an old friend." Daisy looked up from her slate with bright interest. "Are you going to fix Henrietta's house? She's been complaining something awful about the door." "Has she now?" Copper's expression lightened with genuine amusement. "Well, we can't have Henrietta unhappy. She might stop laying eggs altogether." "That's what I told Mama." Daisy bounced in her chair with the excitement of finding an adult who understood the gravity of chicken politics. "Henrietta's the queen of the coop, you know. All the other hens follow her lead." Clara watched the easy exchange between Copper and her daughter with mixed emotions. Daisy had always been cautious around strangers, but something about Copper put her at ease. Perhaps it was his willingness to treat her observations seriously, or maybe children possessed an instinct for recognizing genuine kindness beneath adult complications. "I'll get started on that door then," Copper said. "Unless you need help with anything else first?" Clara glanced around the kitchen, noting the dozen small repairs that had been accumulating since Thomas's death. The window that stuck, the loose floorboard that caught her toe every morning, the shelf that sagged under the weight of her preserving jars. Each item represented another failure to maintain what Thomas had built, another way she was failing to measure up to the life he had envisioned for their family. "The west window sticks," she heard herself saying, "and there's a loose board by the stove that catches on everything. I'll take a look at those, too." Copper settled his hat back on his head. "Mind if I start with the coop? I'd hate to keep Henrietta waiting." After he left, Clara found herself watching through the kitchen window as Copper examined the damaged door. His movements were efficient and knowledgeable, the gestures of someone who had learned to work with his hands despite his current prosperity. She remembered the young man who had helped Thomas build their first barn, whose easy laughter had filled their evenings, and whose dreams had seemed to expand the boundaries of what was possible. "He's nice," Daisy observed, following Clara's gaze. "And he talks to chickens like they're real people." "All chickens are real people, according to your daddy," Clara replied, using Thomas's gentle humor to deflect from more complicated truths. "He used to say they had more personality than most humans he knew." "Do you think the nice man knew Daddy?" The simple question opened a door Clara had been trying to keep closed. How could she explain the tangled history between the three adults? The way love and friendship had become complicated by time and choices, and the different directions life had pulled them? "They were friends when they were young," Clara said, carefully. "Before you were born, before your daddy and I got married." "What kind of friends?" "The best kind. They worked together, laughed together, shared their dreams and plans." Clara's voice grew soft with remembered affection. "Your daddy was the steady one, always thinking things through. Copper the nice man, he was full of big ideas and adventures." "What happened to their friendship?" "Life happened, sweet pea." Sometimes people grow up and want different things, and even the best friendships can't bridge those differences. Daisy absorbed this with the seriousness she brought to all adult explanations, filing it away with the other mysteries of grown-up behavior that she would puzzle over later. Clara envied her daughter's ability to accept complicated truths without needing to understand all their implications. Through the window, Clara watched Copper work steadily on the chicken coop, his movements methodical and sure. He had always been good with his hands, she remembered, able to fix almost anything if given the right tools and materials. It was one of the qualities that had made him so appealing to a young woman looking for security in an uncertain world. But security had proven more elusive than either of them had imagined. Copper's restless ambition had driven him away from everything stable and familiar, while Clara's need for safety had led her to marry a good man she respected rather than the one who had stolen her heart. By mid-morning, the kitchen had grown too warm for comfort. Clara sent Daisy outside to play in the shade while she prepared a simple lunch from their dwindling supplies. The routine of cooking soothed her nerves, the familiar rhythm of chopping and stirring, providing anchor against the chaos of emotion that Copper's presence had stirred up. She found herself preparing more food than she and Daisy could eat, her hands working from memory to create portions suitable for 3 people. The realization made her pause, wooden spoon suspended over the pot of beans she was stirring. Even after 15 years, some part of her still anticipated Copper's presence at their table, the sound of hammer strikes carried through the afternoon air, punctuated by occasional conversation between Copper and Daisy. Clara could hear her daughter's bright chatter and Copper's deeper responses, though she couldn't make out specific words. The domestic symphony felt both foreign and familiar, like a half-remembered song from childhood. When the sun reached its zenith, Clara called them both in for lunch. Copper appeared in the doorway, looking slightly dusty but satisfied, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that spoke of more recent physical labor than his expensive clothes suggested. "The co-op door is fixed," he reported, accepting the basin of water Clara offered for washing. "I reinforced the hinges while I was at it and checked the wire mesh for gaps. Your hens should be secure now. Thank you." Clara's gratitude was genuine, though saying it aloud felt like crossing a line she had drawn for her own protection. "You didn't have to do so thorough a job. Thomas always said if something was worth doing, it was worth doing right." Copper dried his hands on the towel Clara provided, his movements careful and respectful of her space. "Some lessons stick with you." The mention of Thomas brought a moment of silence, but it felt comfortable rather than awkward. Clara dished up beans and cornbread, surprised by how natural it seemed to set 3 places at the table that had accommodated only 2 for so long. Daisy chattered throughout the meal, regaling them with observations about the chickens, personalities and theories about why Henrietta had chosen to be so particular about her living arrangements. Copper listened with the same serious attention he might give a business presentation, asking thoughtful questions and offering his own insights into poultry psychology. "Henrietta reminds me of a moray I knew in Colorado," he said, accepting a second helping of beans. "Beautiful animal, but she had very specific ideas about how her stall should be arranged. Wouldn't eat if her hay wasn't positioned just right." "What happened to her?" Daisy asked. "I sold her to a rancher who appreciated her particular nature. Sometimes the right home makes all the difference." Clara caught the subtle message in his words, the suggestion that finding the right situation could transform even the most challenging circumstances. She wasn't sure whether to feel grateful for his optimism or frustrated by his assumption that their problems could be solved so simply. After lunch, Copper returned to his work, while Clara and Daisy retreated to the kitchen's relative coolness. But Clara found her attention drifting to the window, watching him examine the sagging fence posts with the same methodical care he had brought to the chicken coop. "He makes Mama happy," Daisy observed with the startling directness the children sometimes displayed. What makes you say that? You've been smiling more since he came. And you cooked extra food like you do when you're hoping someone will stay for supper. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks at her daughter's perceptive observation. I always cook extra food. It's good manners. You, huh? Daisy's tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Are you going to marry him? The blunt question made Clara nearly drop the plate she was washing. Daisy Harper. What a thing to ask. Well, he's nice, and he's good at fixing things, and he makes you smile. And he listens when I talk about important things like chickens, and clouds, and why some flowers are prettier than others. Clara sat down heavily, pulling Daisy onto her lap. Sweet pea, grown-up feelings are complicated. Just because two people care about each other doesn't mean they should get married. Why not? Because sometimes caring about someone means protecting them from your own mistakes. Because sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is let them find happiness somewhere else. Daisy considered this with the gravity she brought to all philosophical discussions. But what if they don't want to find happiness somewhere else? What if they want to find it right here with you? The question hung in the air like incense, sweet and heavy with possibility. Clara looked out the window at Copper working in there. Yard, his presence both a gift and a complication she wasn't sure she had the courage to unwrap. The broken fence post stood like a weathered sentinel at the corner of Clara's property, its splintered wood bearing witness to years of harsh weather and gradual neglect. Copper examined it with the practiced eye of someone who understood that small problems left unattended could become catastrophic failures. The post had been solid when Thomas installed it, but time and the relentless prairie wind had worked their slow damage until now it leaned at a precarious angle, threatening to take down 20 feet of fence line with its eventual collapse. This whole section needs attention, Copper said, running his hand along the weathered wood. The posts are still good, but the connections have loosened. Clara stood beside him in the early morning light, her hair caught back in a practical braid, and her sleeves rolled up for work. 3 days had passed since their conversation in the cemetery, and she had surprised herself by accepting his continued offers of help. Not charity, she told herself, but a fair exchange his labor for her meals and the satisfaction of useful work. Thomas always meant to replace these posts, she said, touching the splintered wood with gentle fingers. He had plans for everything. You know, improvements and upgrades, ways to make the place more prosperous. But there was never enough time or money to do everything at once. Thomas was a good planner, Copper agreed. But he also understood that some things can't be rushed. Building something that lasts takes patience. They worked in comfortable silence, Clara holding posts steady while Copper secured them with new wire and reinforcement brackets he had purchased in town. The physical labor felt good after days of worry and sleepless nights, providing a tangible sense of progress against the overwhelming nature of their problems. As the morning wore on, conversation flowed more easily between them. Copper asked about the property's layout, the seasonal challenges Clara faced, the dreams Thomas had shared for expanding their operation. Clara found herself describing plans that had died with her husband, aspirations that had seemed impossible after his death, but somehow felt achievable again with capable hands helping her. He wanted to dig a new well closer to the house, she said, pointing toward a slight depression in the ground where Thomas had marked the spot. The current one serves, but it's too far from the kitchen garden. During dry spells, I spend half my day carrying water buckets. Copper studied the terrain with the same attention he had given the fence posts. The elevation is right for good water pressure. What stopped him from starting the project? Cost, mostly, and worry about hitting the water table wrong and losing everything. Clara's voice grew soft with remembered conversations. Thomas was careful about risks. He'd rather go slow and be certain than gamble and lose what we already had. Smart man. But sometimes careful planning can accomplish what quick risks can't. The observation hung between them, weighted with implications that went beyond well digging. Clara found herself studying Copper's profile as he worked, noting the concentration in his expression and the methodical way he approached each task. Success had changed him, but the essential qualities that had drawn her to him years ago remained visible beneath the polish. "You've learned patience," she said, surprising herself with the observation. Copper paused in his work, meeting her gaze, with an expression that combined gratitude and regret. "Took me long enough. I used to think patience was just another word for giving up. And now I understand it's another word for faith. Faith that good things take time to build properly." Daisy appeared around the corner of the house, her doll tucked under one arm and a serious expression on her young face. She had been quieter than usual since the land speculator's visit, her natural chatter subdued by adult tensions she sensed, but couldn't fully understand. "Mama, Mrs. Patterson is coming up the road," she announced. "She looks upset about something." Clara shaded her eyes against the climbing sun, watching their neighbor's familiar figure approach with more speed than her usual leisurely pace. Eleanor Patterson had been a friend since Clara's arrival in Shiloh Falls, one of the few women who had looked past her status as a newcomer with mysterious past to offer genuine friendship. "Clara, dear." Eleanor was slightly breathless when she reached them, her graying hair escaping from its usually perfect arrangement. "I came as soon as I heard." "Heard what?" "About the railroad meeting yesterday. About the survey teams that are supposed to start work next week." Eleanor's worried gaze moved between Clara and Copper, taking in their working clothes and the evidence of fence repairs. "Nobody seems to know exactly which properties they're planning to acquire, but there's talk." "What kind of talk?" Copper's voice carried a tension that made Clara look at him sharply. "That some homesteads might be taken through eminent domain if the owners won't sell voluntarily. That the railroad has more power than anyone realized." Eleanor wrung her hands, a gesture Clara had never seen from the usually composed woman. "My husband went to the bank this morning to ask about our mortgage, and Mr. Henley wouldn't look him in the eye. Just kept saying everything would work out for the best." Clara felt the familiar cold dread settle in her stomach. She had hoped that rejecting the land speculators would be the end of the matter, that they would simply move on to easier targets. The possibility that larger forces were at work, that individual choices might not matter in the face of corporate planning, had never occurred to her. "They can't just take people's homes," Daisy said with the indignation of childhood innocence. "That's stealing." Eleanor's expression soft as she looked at the little girl. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups call stealing by other names, too. Make it sound more acceptable." "What kind of names?" "Progress. Development. The greater good." Eleanor's voice carried a bitterness that Clara had never heard before. "But you're right, dear one. Taking someone's home is stealing, no matter what fancy words you dress it up in." Copper had been silent during this exchange, but Clara could see tension building in his shoulders in the careful way he set down his tools. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but carried an undercurrent that made her pay close attention. "How much do you know about the railroad's timeline?" he asked Eleanor. "Not much. Just that survey teams are supposed to arrive Monday, and that families living on the proposed route have been advised to consider their options carefully." Eleanor's tone made it clear what she thought of such advice. "Why? Do you know something we don't?" Clara saw Copper's internal struggle play out across his features. Whatever knowledge he possessed, sharing it would require revealing his own role in the situation. She realized with sudden clarity that his presence in Shiloh Falls wasn't purely personal. He had business connections to the very forces threatening their community. "I might be able to find out more," Copper said carefully. "I have contacts in the railroad industry who might know about the survey schedule and property acquisition plans." "That would be wonderful," Eleanor said, relief evident in her voice. "Information is the only weapon ordinary people have against this kind of pressure." After Eleanor left, promising to spread word about Copper's offer to investigate, Clara and Copper returned to their fence repairs in silence that felt different. From their earlier comfortable companionship, Clara could sense questions building behind Copper's careful expression, and she suspected her own face showed similar tension. "You're not just a successful businessman, are you?" she asked finally. "You're connected to all this somehow." Copper's hands stilled on the wire he was securing. "I work for a land development company that has contracts with several railroad lines. I came to Shiloh Falls on business." The admission hit Clara like cold water. What kind of business? The kind that involves identifying properties suitable for acquisition and negotiating with current owners. Copper's voice was steady, but Clara could see the strain in his posture. "The kind that brought those speculators to your door." Clara stepped back from the fence post, her hands suddenly unsteady. "You're one of them. You're here to take our homes." "No." Copper turned to face her fully, his expression urgent. "Clara, it's more complicated than that." "How is it complicated?" "You work for people who want to destroy our community, and you didn't think to mention this small detail while you were playing the concerned old friend?" "I am concerned, and I am your friend, regardless of who signs my paychecks." Copper's voice rose slightly before he controlled it, glancing toward the house where Daisy might be listening. "I took this job because I thought it would be routine business, acquiring land from willing sellers for legitimate development. I didn't know it would involve pressuring families or using foreclosure proceedings as leverage. But now you do know. So what are you going to do about it?" The question hung between them like a challenge, and Clara realized she was holding her breath, waiting for his answer. This moment would define everything that followed. Whether Copper had truly changed from the ambitious young man who had left 15 years ago, or whether success had simply taught him more sophisticated ways to pursue his own interests. "I'm going to help you fight them," Copper said quietly. "All of you, whatever it takes, even if it costs you your job, your reputation, your precious success." Copper looked around the property they had been working to improve, his gaze taking in the house where Thomas had died and Daisy had been born, the chicken coop where Henrietta ruled her domain, the fence, posts that connected this small piece of earth to the larger world. "Clara, I spent 15 years learning how to acquire things. Maybe it's time I learned how to protect what matters." Daisy's hand-drawn map lay spread across the kitchen table like a treasure chart, its childish lines and careful labels marking every important feature of the only world she had ever known. She had worked on it for 3 days, using colored pencils, worn down to stubs and paper, carefully saved from her school supplies. The result was a masterpiece of 10-year-old cartography that captured not just the physical layout of their property, but the emotional geography of home. "This is where Daddy planted the apple tree for my first birthday," Daisy explained to Copper, pointing to a green circle near the house. "And this is the rock that looks like a sleeping bear, if you squint your eyes just right." Clara watched. From the stove where she was preparing their evening meal, stirring a pot of beans that would stretch to feed 3 people with careful portioning. The domestic scene felt both natural and dangerous natural, because Copper fit so easily into their routine, dangerous because she was starting to depend on his presence in ways that scared her. "What's this line here?" Copper asked, tracing a blue mark that wandered across the southern portion of the map. "That's the creek bed. It only has water when it rains real hard, but Daddy said it used to run all year round before the drought." "Years?" Daisy's finger followed the meandering path. He was going to dig it deeper so the water would stay longer. Another one of Thomas's unfinished projects, Clara thought with the familiar ache of interrupted dreams. Her late husband had been full of plans for improving their land, each one carefully considered and financially responsible. The irony that they might lose everything before any of those improvements could be completed wasn't lost on her. "Your daddy was a smart man," Copper said seriously. Creek beds tell you a lot about how water moves across the land. If you know where it wants to go naturally, you can work with it instead of against it. Could you help me dig it deeper? Daisy asked with the straightforward hope that children brought to adult promises. I think Daddy would like that. Clara saw Copper's expression grow complicated, shadows of uncertainty crossing his features. Since his admission about working for the Railroad Development Company, the easy camaraderie between them had been strained. Clara found herself watching him for signs of deception, wondering what other connections he might have failed to mention. That would depend on your mama, Copper said carefully, and on whether we can solve some other problems first. You mean the mean men who want to take our house? Among other things. Daisy absorbed this with the seriousness she brought to all adult complications. Mama says sometimes grown-ups make things more complicated than they need to be. Your mama is very wise. Clara dished up their supper, setting plates around the table with movements made efficient by years of practice. The meal was simple beans, cornbread, and vegetables from their struggling garden, but she had prepared it with care. Cooking had always been her way of showing love, and old habits persisted even when the recipients of that love complicated her life beyond measure. I went to see Mr. Henley at the bank today, Clara said as they began eating. Thought I should understand exactly what our situation is. Copper's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What did he say? That the foreclosure proceedings are moving forward as scheduled. That there's nothing he can do to extend the deadline or reduce the amount owed. Clara kept her voice matter of fact, though the conversation had left her feeling hollow. He also mentioned that several other families in the area are facing similar difficulties. How many families? At least 6 that he would admit to, probably more. Clara had seen the fear in the banker's eyes, the look of a man caught between competing loyalties. He kept saying it was unfortunate, but unavoidable, like he was reading from a script someone else had written. Daisy looked between them with the radar children possessed for adult tension. Are we going to have to move away, like the Hendersons? Did? The question hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire. Clara had been dreading it, knowing her daughter was smart enough to understand the implications of foreclosure, even if she didn't grasp all the details. I hope not, sweet pea. We're going to do everything we can to stay right here. Can the nice man help us? Daisy asked, turning to Copper with the trust that made Clara's chest tighten. You're rich, aren't you? Rich people can fix things that poor people can't. Copper set down his fork, giving Daisy his full attention. Being rich doesn't automatically make someone good at solving problems, little one. And sometimes the most important problems can't be fixed with money alone. But you want to help us, don't you? More than anything. Copper's voice carried conviction that made Clara look at him sharply. But wanting to help and knowing how to help aren't always the same thing. After supper, while Daisy played with her doll on the porch, Clara and Copper walked the property boundaries in the gathering dusk. The evening air carried the scent of prairie grass and the distant promise of rain, though the sky remained stubbornly clear. Clara had learned to read the subtle signs of weather in this landscape, to distinguish between false hope and genuine possibility. There's something you need to know, Copper said as they paused beside the old well. About why I really came back to Shiloh Falls. Clara's stomach clenched with familiar dread. More secrets? Not secrets. Just context I should have provided earlier. Copper leaned against the well's stone rim, his expression troubled. When my company assigned me to evaluate properties in this area, I volunteered for the job. Why? Because I knew this place would be on the list. I knew your situation, had heard about Thomas's death and the struggles you were facing. Copper's voice grew quiet. I told myself I was coming back on business, but the truth is, I was looking for an excuse to see you again. Clara felt her world shift slightly, old assumptions rearranging themselves to accommodate this new information. You've been keeping track of me? Not actively. But small towns have long memories, and news travels on the railroad lines. I heard about your marriage, about Daisy's birth, about Thomas's illness. Copper's hands clenched at his sides. I stayed away because I thought that was what you wanted, what you deserved. And what changed your mind? The foreclosure notice. When I learned about the bank proceedings, I realized that staying away wasn't protecting you anymore. It was just protecting me from having to face what I'd done. They walked in silence for several minutes. Following the fence line, Clara and Copper had repaired together. The work had been satisfying in a way that surprised her. The physical labor providing tangible evidence of progress and cooperation. But now even those small victories felt overshadowed by larger forces beyond their control. Copper, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Always. If you weren't here, if you had never come back, would my situation be any different? Would the railroad still be coming for our land? Copper stopped walking, turning to face her in the fading light. Yes, this has been in planning for over a year. Your property is positioned exactly where they need it for the rail spur, and they would have found a way to acquire it whether I was involved or not. But you could have facilitated that acquisition, made it easier for them. I could have. I was supposed to. Copper's voice carried the weight of professional obligation, warring with personal loyalty. Instead, I've been sending reports that recommend alternative routes and suggest the original timeline is too aggressive. Clara studied his face, searching for signs of deception or self-serving rationalization. What she saw was a man genuinely torn between competing loyalties, someone trying to navigate impossible choices with imperfect information. What happens when your employers realize you're sabotaging their plans? I lose my job, probably my reputation in the industry, possibly face legal consequences if they can prove I acted against their interests deliberately. And you're willing to risk all that for what? Guilt? Nostalgia? Copper stepped closer, close enough that Clara could see the mix of determination and uncertainty in his eyes. For you, for Daisy, for the chance to finally do something that matters more than my own success. The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Clara felt 15 years of carefully constructed defenses wavering, threatened by the sincerity in Copper's voice and the evidence of his actions over the past week. Clara, I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you. I know I forfeited. That 15 years ago, when I chose my ambitions over our future, Copper's voice grew urgent. But I'm asking anyway. Let me help you fight this. Let me try to be the man Thomas believed I could become. And what about after? What happens when the immediate crisis is over? Do you disappear again, leaving us to deal with whatever consequences your help might bring? I don't know. The honesty in his admission was both refreshing and terrifying. I wish I could promise you certainty, Clara, but I've learned that life doesn't offer many guarantees. All I can tell you is that I'm not the same man who left here 15 years ago. Prove it. The challenge came out more sharply than Clara had intended, but she didn't take it back. Words were easy. Actions required sacrifice and commitment that revealed character more clearly than any declaration of intent. How? Clara looked around the property that represented everything she and Thomas had built together, everything Daisy stood to inherit or lose. The hand-drawn map in their kitchen captured only the physical features of their land, but couldn't show the layers of memory and meaning that made it home. Help me save this place, not just by throwing money at the problem, but by fighting the system that created it. Clara's voice grew stronger as she spoke. Help me organize the other families, find legal alternatives, expose whatever underhanded tactics the railroad is using to pressure people into selling. That could take months, maybe years. Then you'd better be prepared to stay that long. Copper was quiet for a moment, looking across the darkening landscape that had shaped both, their lives in different ways. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision that would change everything. I'll wire my resignation tomorrow. Copper, Clara, I've spent 15 years accumulating money and status that turned to ash the moment I saw you. Standing in that doorway with Daisy, I don't need another fortune. I need a reason to get up in the morning that doesn't involve calculating other people's worth in dollars and cents. A sound from the house interrupted them, Daisy calling that. She was ready for her bedtime story. The domestic interruption brought them back to the present, to the reality of a little girl who needed stability and routine, regardless of the adult complications swirling around her. Think about what I've said, Copper told Clara as they walked back toward the house. And remember that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. As Clara tucked Daisy into bed that night, her daughter's questions came in the sleepy stream of consciousness that marked the transition between day and dreams. Mama, do you think the nice man will really stay this time? Clara smoothed her daughter's hair, choosing her words carefully. I think he wants to stay, Sweet Pea, but wanting something and being able to do it aren't always the same thing. But he's different now, isn't he? Different from when he went away before? Yes, I think he is. Good. Daisy's voice was already growing drowsy. Because I like having him here. It feels like we're a real family again. The innocent observation stayed with Clara long after Daisy fell asleep, a reminder that their choices affected more than just their own hearts and futures. Whatever happened between her and Copper, whatever risks they took in fighting the railroad, Daisy would bear the consequences alongside them. But as Clara lay in her own bed, staring at the ceiling where moonlight painted familiar patterns, she found herself thinking not about the dangers ahead, but about the possibility that Copper's return might offer more than just help with their immediate problems. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included partnership, shared dreams, and the chance to build something new from the foundation of what had been lost. The hidden love letters surfaced like ghosts from a forgotten grave, discovered when Clara moved Thomas's old desk to make room for the legal documents that had begun accumulating in their fight against the railroad. The desk had been her late husband's sanctuary, the place where he kept records and conducted the business of their modest farm. Clara had avoided disturbing it for 7 years, treating it as a shrine to his memory and methodical nature. But desperation had driven her to search every corner of the house for documents that might help their cause property deeds, surveys, anything that could strengthen their legal position. When she lifted the desk to examine the wall behind it, a loose floorboard caught her attention. Beneath that board lay a small wooden box, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth and marked with Thomas's precise handwriting, for Clara when she's ready to understand. Her hands trembled as she opened the box, expecting to find sentimental mementos, or perhaps a letter explaining Thomas's final wishes. Instead, she discovered a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon letters written in Copper's familiar hand and addressed to her, postmarked from various mining towns across Colorado and Montana. The first letter was dated 6 months after Copper's departure from Shiloh Falls, when Clara was already engaged to Thomas, but not yet married. The paper was wrinkled and stained, suggesting it had been handled many times over the years. My dearest Clara, the letter began, and Clara's heart clenched at the formal endearment. I know I have no right to write to you after the way I left. No right to ask for your attention when I failed so completely to deserve it. But I cannot let another day pass without telling you the truth about why I disappeared like a coward in the night. Clara sank into Thomas's chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. She had never received this letter, had never known that Copper had written to explain his departure. For 15 years, she had believed he had simply vanished without a word, too selfish or careless to offer even the courtesy of goodbye. I left because I was terrified, the letter continued. Terrified that I would fail you as I had failed at everything else. Terrified that my dreams were bigger than my abilities. Terrified that you would wake up one day and realize you had wasted your love on a man who could offer you nothing but good intentions and empty promises. Tears blurred Clara's vision as she read words that would have changed everything if she had received them when they were written. The young man who had penned these lines bore little resemblance to the callous opportunist she had imagined all these years. I heard about your engagement to Thomas through a mutual friend, and though it broke my heart, I was glad to know you had found someone worthy of your trust. Thomas is a good man who will give you the security and stability I could not. But Clara, I want you to know that leaving you is the hardest thing I have ever done, and not a day passes that I don't question whether I made the right choice. The second letter was dated a year later, written from a mining camp outside Denver, where copper had apparently found modest success. This letter spoke of small triumphs and continued longing, of money saved and plans made for a return to Kansas that circumstances had prevented. I know you are married now, and I respect the vows you have taken, this letter read. But I wanted you to know that I am building something real at last, something that could provide the foundation for the life we once dreamed of sharing. If there is any part of you that remembers what we meant to each other, I will be on the eastbound train that arrives in Shiloh Falls on October 15th. I will wait at the depot until sunset, hoping for the chance to speak with you and explain everything that went wrong between us. Clara's breath caught as she calculated the date. October 15th, 1872, months before Gazy was conceived, during a period when her marriage to Thomas had been strained by crop failures and financial worry. She remembered that day clearly now, remembered Thomas working late in the barn while she paced the kitchen floor, battling a restlessness she couldn't name. She had felt drawn to town that evening, had even started toward the depot before stopping herself. The pull had been so strong that she had invented an errand for the general store. But Mrs. Garrett had been closing early, and Clara had returned home disappointed without understanding why. If she had continued to the depot, if she had overcome her sense of duty and proper behavior, would she have found Copper waiting there? Would their lives have taken a completely different path? The remaining letters chronicled Copper's growing success and continued devotion, his repeated attempts to return to Kansas, and the circumstances that repeatedly prevented it. A mining accident that left him bedridden for months. A business partnership that collapsed just as he was preparing to travel. A fire that destroyed everything he had built, forcing him to start over in yet another town. I know these letters may never reach you, he wrote in the final correspondence, dated just 3 years ago. Thomas may have chosen to shield you from the confusion they might cause, and perhaps he is wise to do so. You have built a life that brings you happiness, and disturbing that peace would be selfish beyond forgiveness. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, Clara. I never stopped believing that we were meant to find our way back to each other. If these words ever reach your eyes, know that somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, a foolish man is still hoping for the chance to make amends for the greatest mistake of his life. Clara sat in stunned silence, the letters scattered across Thomas's desk like pieces of a puzzle that reframed her entire understanding of the past. Her late husband had intercepted Copper's correspondence for years, had known about his attempts to return, his continued feelings, his growing success. But why? Thomas had been the most honest man she knew, incapable of deliberate deception or manipulation. What could have motivated him to keep such momentous secrets? The answer came in the form of a single sheet of paper tucked beneath the other letters, written in Thomas's careful hand and dated just weeks before his death. My beloved Clara, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have discovered what I could never find the courage to tell you while I lived. The letters came regularly for years, and each time I told myself I was protecting you from unnecessary pain. You were my wife, mother to my daughter in every way that mattered, and disturbing your peace seemed cruel when nothing could be changed. But as I grow weaker and my time grows short, I realize that my silence may have been more about protecting myself than protecting you. I was afraid that if you knew Copper still cared, still hoped for reconciliation. You might regret the choice you made. I was afraid that my own happiness might have been built on a foundation of secrets and missed opportunities. I want you to know that our marriage brought me more joy than I ever dared hope for. You gave me love, partnership, and a daughter who carries the best parts of both of us. Whatever feelings you may have harbored for Copper, you honored our vows completely and made our home a place of warmth and laughter. But Clara, you deserve to know the truth about the past before you make decisions about the future. Copper never stopped loving you, never stopped hoping for the chance to return. The success he has achieved was always meant to be offered to you, a foundation for the life he dreamed of building together. If he has returned to Shiloh Falls, if circumstances have brought you together again, do not let my mistakes dictate your choices. You have given me more happiness than any man deserves. Now give yourself the chance to discover what might have been. The letter was signed with all the love and respect that had characterized Thomas's treatment of her throughout their marriage. But Clara could read between the lines to see his struggle with guilt and uncertainty. He had made choices that affected all their lives, decisions based on love and fear in equal measure. A sound from the kitchen interrupted her stunned contemplation. Copper's voice, asking if she needed help with anything. The normal domestic inquiry felt surreal in light of what she had just discovered, the casual words carrying weight that he couldn't possibly understand. Clara? His voice grew closer as he approached the study. I brought some papers from town that might help with the legal research. She quickly gathered the letters, her hands shaking as she tried to process emotions too large and complicated for immediate understanding. 15 years of assumptions had been overturned in the space of an hour, and she needed time to sort through the implications before she could share this revelation with anyone. "I'm here," she called, shoving the letters back into their hiding place. "Just looking through Thomas's papers for anything that might be useful." Copper appeared in the doorway, his arms full of legal documents and his expression bright with purpose. "I spoke with a lawyer in Kansas City who specializes in railroad disputes. He says there are precedents for challenging eminent domain proceedings, especially if the compensation offered is below fair market value." Clara nodded mechanically, trying to focus on his words while her mind reeled with the knowledge that he had never stopped loving her, never stopped hoping for reunion. The man standing before her was the same person who had written those passionate letters, who had attempted return after return only to be thwarted by circumstances and her husband's protective silence. "Clara, are you all right? You look pale." "Just tired. It's been a long day." Copper set down his papers and moved closer, his expression concerned. "Maybe you should rest. We can review these documents tomorrow." "No, I'm fine. Really." Clara forced herself to meet his eyes, wondering if she could see traces of the longing described in his letters. "Tell me about this lawyer. What does he think our chances are?" As Copper outlined legal strategies and precedents, Clara found herself studying his face with new understanding. Every gesture, every expression, was colored by the knowledge that his feelings for her had never diminished, that his return to Shiloh Falls was motivated by more than business, obligation, or nostalgic guilt. The question now was what to do with this knowledge. How could she tell him that she had finally read his letters, finally understood the depth of his devotion and the extent of Thomas's well-meaning deception? How could she admit that her anger and sense of abandonment had been based on incomplete information? And how could she begin to sort through her own feelings, to distinguish between the safety of memory and the terrifying possibility of a second chance at the love that had shaped her understanding of passion and loss? "Clara, you're not listening to a word I'm saying." Copper's gentle observation brought her back to the present moment, to the study where Thomas had kept his secrets, and she had discovered truths that changed everything. "I'm sorry. I'm just overwhelmed by everything that's happening. I know this is difficult. Fighting the railroad, dealing with financial pressure, having me complicate your life by showing up unannounced. Copper's voice carried genuine regret. Maybe I should have stayed away, let you handle this without the added burden of our history. No, the word came out more forcefully than Clara intended. No, I'm glad you're here. Whatever happens, I'm glad you came back. Something in her tone made Copper look at her more carefully, his expression shifting from concern to curiosity. Clara, what's changed? An hour ago you were barely tolerating my presence, and now I'm beginning to understand that I may have misjudged some things about the past. What kind of things? Clara hesitated, torn between the need to share her discovery and uncertainty about how to explain years of misunderstanding without revealing Thomas's role in perpetuating it. Her late husband deserved to be remembered with love and respect, not blamed for choices that had seemed reasonable at the time. I found some papers that shed new light on why you left, what you went through afterward. Clara chose her words carefully, trying to honor both truth and loyalty. I realize now that I may have been too quick to assume the worst about your motivations. Copper's expression grew complicated, hope warring with caution. What kind of papers? Letters? Correspondence that I never received. That explained things I never understood. My letters to you. Copper's voice was barely above a whisper. Thomas kept them. Clara nodded, watching his face cycle through emotions. She was only beginning to understand herself. Relief, vindication, anger, and something deeper that might have been grief for all the lost years between them. How many? He asked. Dozens, spanning years, including details about your attempts to return, your success in the mining industry, your continued. Clara's voice caught on the words that would change everything between them. Your continued feelings for me. The silence that followed was heavy with 15 years of accumulated misunderstanding and missed opportunities. Clara could see Copper processing the implications, realizing that her anger and sense of abandonment had been based on incomplete information. Why? He asked finally. Why did Thomas keep them from you? Because he loved me. Because he was afraid of losing what we had built together. Because he was human. And humans make imperfect choices when they're trying to protect the people they care about. Clara's defense of her late husband was instinctive, but it was also genuine. Reading Thomas's final letter had helped her understand his motivations, even if she couldn't fully condone his methods. I don't blame him, Copper said quietly. If our situations had been reversed, if I had been married to you and another man was trying to win you back, I might have made the same choice. But you would have been wrong, just as he was wrong. Would I have been? Clara, you were happy with Thomas. You built a good life together, raised a wonderful daughter, created something stable and meaningful. Maybe he was protecting that happiness in the only way he knew how. Clara felt tears threaten, moved by Copper's generosity toward the man who had been both friend and rival. But what about your happiness? What about the years you spent believing I had simply forgotten you, that I didn't care enough to respond to your letters? Those years taught me things I needed to learn. Patience, humility, the difference between wanting something and deserving it. Copper moved closer, close enough that Clara could see the sincerity in his eyes. Clara, I'm not sorry Thomas kept those letters if it meant you had the chance to love and be loved completely. You deserved that happiness. And what did you deserve? The chance to become worthy of you, which I'm still working on. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Clara felt the weight of choices that would affect not just her own future, but Daisy's as well. Decisions that would honor the past, while embracing possibilities that had seemed lost forever. Copper, there's something else. Something Thomas wrote before he died. Clara's voice grew unsteady as she prepared to share the most personal part of her discovery. He said that if you ever returned, if circumstances brought us together again, I shouldn't let his mistakes dictate my choices. He wrote that? He said I had given him more happiness than any man deserved, and that I should give myself the chance to discover what might have been. Copper was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the implications of a dead man's blessing on a love that had never truly died. When he finally spoke, his voice carried wonder and something that might have been hope. What does that mean for us, Clara? For you and me and Daisy and everything we're trying to build here? I don't know yet. I need time to process all of this, to understand what it means and what I want it to mean. Clara looked around the study where she had discovered truths that changed everything. But I know that I'm tired of making decisions based on fear and incomplete information. And I'm tired of living with regrets about choices I never got the chance to make. The sound of Daisy's voice, calling from the kitchen, interrupted their moment of revelation, reminding them both that their decisions affected more than just their own hearts. A 10-year-old girl was preparing for bed in the next room, trusting the adults in her life to create a stable foundation for her future. We should continue this conversation later, Clara said, though every part of her wanted to stay in this moment of possibility and truth-telling. When you're ready, when you've had time to think about what this means for all of us. As they gathered the legal documents and prepared to return to the routine demands of evening, Clara felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the past and her vision of the future. The letters hidden beneath Thomas's desk had revealed more than just Copper's continued devotion. They had exposed the complex ways that love could motivate both generosity and selfishness, how the desire to protect could become a form of control. They had also offered something more precious than vindication or explanation. They had given her permission to hope again, to believe that some chances could be reclaimed even after years of separation and misunderstanding. As she tucked Daisy into bed that night, Clara found herself looking forward rather than backward for the first time in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in their fight against the railroad, new complications in navigating the relationship between her, Copper, and the community they were trying to save. But tonight, she allowed herself to imagine a future where love could triumph over fear, where second chances could heal old wounds, and where the foundation Thomas had helped her build could support something new and beautiful and worth fighting for. Clara's wedding dress emerged from the trunk like a ghost made of silk and memory, its ivory fabric still beautiful despite 23 years of careful storage. She had preserved it with the same devotion she brought to her recipe book and had Daisy's baby clothes, understanding that some objects carried emotional weight far beyond their practical value. The dress represented not just her marriage to Thomas, but hope itself, the belief that love could triumph over uncertainty and create something lasting and beautiful. The foreclosure deadline was 3 days away, and their legal challenges had proven frustratingly slow. The lawyer Copper had consulted offered precedents and procedures that might eventually succeed, but eventually was a luxury they couldn't afford. The railroad surveyor teams had arrived that morning, tramping across properties with the authority of men who already considered the land theirs to measure and map. "It's beautiful, Mama." Daisy touched the dress's delicate lace sleeves with careful fingers. "You look like a fairy tale princess when you wear pretty things." Clara had brought the dress down from the attic, not for nostalgic indulgence, but for practical necessity. Mrs. Patterson had suggested that a community gathering might rally support for the families facing displacement, and Clara had volunteered to organize it. The dress would serve as her armor for the evening ahead, a reminder that she had survived loss before and emerged stronger. "Your daddy always said this dress made me look like I could accomplish anything," Clara told Daisy, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from the fabric. "I think I need to feel that way tonight." The past week had transformed their lives in ways Clara was still struggling to understand. Copper's revelation about the intercepted letters had shifted the foundation of everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the choices that shaped their destinies. But alongside the emotional upheaval came practical changes that were equally Significant. Copper had resigned from his position with the land development company, burning bridges, with employers who now viewed him as a traitor to their cause. He had liquidated investments and called in favors, assembling resources for a fight that grew more complex each day. Most importantly, he had moved from the hotel into the barn, close enough to help with daily responsibilities but respectable, enough to avoid scandal in a community already under pressure. "Will there be dancing at the party tonight?" Daisy asked, settling her doll carefully on the bed where it could watch the proceedings. "It's not exactly a party, Sweet Pea. More like a meeting where neighbors help neighbors figure out solutions to shared problems. But people might dance afterward, right? If they figure out good solutions?" Clara smiled at her daughter's optimism, the child's faith that adult problems could be resolved through cooperation and goodwill. If only the world operated according to 10-year-old logic, where fairness was absolute and happy endings were guaranteed to those who deserve them. Maybe they will dance if we give them reason to celebrate. The afternoon sun slanted through the bedroom windows, painting everything in shades of gold that reminded Clara of better times when the future had seemed secure and predictable. She thought about the morning Copper had first returned, how his presence had felt like a disruption to the quiet desperation she had learned to call normal. Now his absence would feel like losing a limb he had become that, integrated into their daily rhythms and future planning. A knock at the front door interrupted her preparation. Through the window, Clara could see Eleanor Patterson standing on the porch with a covered dish and an expression of barely contained excitement. "Clara, dear, you need to see this," Eleanor called as soon as the door opened. "The most remarkable thing has happened." "What kind of remarkable thing?" "People are coming. Not just from Shiloh Falls, but from communities all along the proposed rail line. Word has spread about tonight's gathering, and families are traveling hours to be here." Clara felt her stomach flutter with nervous energy. She had envisioned a small meeting of local residents, perhaps 15 or 20 people sharing concerns and strategies. The prospect of addressing a larger crowd filled her with equal parts hope and terror. How many people are we talking about? At least 50 families, possibly more. The Hendersons are driving down from their new place near Topeka. The Webbers closed their store early to be here. Even some folks from towns that aren't directly affected are coming to show support. Eleanor's excitement was infectious, but Clara felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. These people were looking for leadership, for someone who could articulate their fears and mobilize their resistance. She wasn't sure she possessed the eloquence or authority such a moment demanded. "Eleanor, I'm not sure I'm the right person to lead this kind of gathering. Maybe we should ask Reverend Morrison or someone with more experience speaking to crowds." "Nonsense. You're exactly the right person because you understand what everyone is facing. You've been where they are, fighting the same battles, making the same impossible choices." Eleanor set down her covered dish and took Clara's hands in hers. "Besides, you're not leading this alone. Copper has been working all week to organize legal resources and document the railroad's questionable tactics." The mention of Copper brought another flutter of nervous energy, though this one had less to do with public speaking and more to do with the complicated dance they had been performing since the discovery of the letters. They had shared meals and work and conversation, but the deeper implications of Thomas's revelations remained unspoken between them. A bridge neither had quite found the courage to cross. Where is Copper now? Setting up chairs in the church hall with some of the other men. He's also arranged for a stenographer to document everything that's said tonight in case we need official records for legal proceedings. Clara nodded, impressed, despite herself by Copper's attention to detail and long-term thinking. The man who had once pursued dreams with more enthusiasm than planning had learned to consider consequences and prepare for multiple contingencies. As evening approached, Clara finished her preparations with ritual care. The wedding dress fit differently than it had 23 years ago, looser in some places, tighter in others, but it still carried the magic Thomas had recognized. When she looked in the mirror, she saw not a struggling widow facing foreclosure, but a woman capable of fighting for what mattered. Daisy insisted on wearing her best dress as well, the blue cotton with white trim that Clara had sewn for her birthday. The little girl understood that tonight was important, even if she couldn't grasp all the implications of what the adults hoped to accomplish. "Do I look brave enough to help save our house?" Daisy asked, spinning to make her skirt flare. "You look brave enough to save the whole world, sweet pea." They walked to the church together as the sun began to set, joining streams of families converging on the small building that served as Shiloh Falls, center for community gatherings. Clara recognized some faces and found others completely unfamiliar, but all wore similar expressions of determination mixed with uncertainty. The church hall buzzed with nervous energy as people found seats and exchanged stories about their own struggles with the railroad's advance. Children played in corners, while adults discussed legal strategies and shared information about compensation offers and foreclosure proceedings. The solidarity was heartening, but Clara could also sense the fragility of hope it brought so many. People together. Copper appeared at her elbow as she stood in the doorway, taking in the scene of organized resistance that had grown from her desperate desire to fight back. "Quite a turnout," he said softly. "Are you ready for this?" "No, but I don't think readiness is the point anymore." "What is the point?" Clara looked around the room full of families who had traveled hours for the chance to save their homes and communities. She thought about Daisy's hand-drawn map, about Thomas's intercepted letters, about the wedding dress that had given her courage through one major life transition and was now being called upon to provide strength for another. The point is that some things are worth fighting for, even when you're terrified of losing. Clara met Copper's eyes, seeing her own determination reflected there. The point is that we don't have to face impossible odds alone, and if we lose, then we lose together, fighting for something that mattered. But Copper, I don't think we're going to lose. What makes you so certain? Clara smiled, feeling the power of community solidarity and renewed love flowing through her like electricity. Because we finally understand what we're really fighting for. Not just land or houses or financial security, but the right to choose our own futures. And that's something worth any risk. As the meeting began and Clara stepped forward to address the crowd, she felt Thomas's presence alongside her, not as a ghost from the past, but as a foundation upon which new possibilities could be built. The wedding dress whispered against her legs as she moved, carrying the memory of vows that had sustained her through loss and the promise of new commitments yet to be made. Tonight would determine not just the fate of their homes, but the shape of the future they dared to imagine together. And for the first time in years, Clara believed that future could be everything they had the courage to fight for. The business contract lay spread across the church altar like a sacred text, its dense legal language representing millions of dollars in railroad development and the destruction of everything the assembled families held dear. Copper stood before the crowd with the document in his hands, his expression grave as he prepared to reveal the full scope of the conspiracy they faced. "This contract was supposed to be confidential," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed hall. "It outlines not just the railroad's timeline for land acquisition, but their methods for forcing reluctant sellers to cooperate." A murmur rippled through the crowd as people leaned forward to catch every word. Clara sat in the front row with Daisy beside her, her wedding dress a stark contrast to the working clothes worn by most of the other attendees. She felt the weight of collective hope pressing against her shoulders, the trust these families had placed in her ability to articulate their shared desperation. "The railroad has been coordinating with local banks to accelerate foreclosure proceedings," Copper continued, his businessman's training evident in his clear presentation of complex Information. They've also been pressuring suppliers to inflate prices for essential goods, making it harder for struggling families to stay solvent. That's illegal, isn't it? Called out Jim Weber from the back of the room. They can't manipulate the market. Like that, it's illegal if we can prove it, Copper replied. And proving it requires documentation that the railroad has been careful to keep confidential. Until now. He held up a thick folder of papers, and Clara felt her heart race with a mixture of hope and terror. Whatever evidence Copper had assembled could save their community or destroy his own future, depending on how the legal system responded to his revelations. "How did you get those documents?" Eleanor Patterson asked, voicing the question Clara could see on every face in the room. Copper's expression grew complicated, shadows passing across his features like clouds over the sun. "Through my former position with the Land Development Company, I copied files before I resigned, knowing they would be destroyed or hidden once litigation began." "That's theft," someone called from the middle of the room, though the tone suggested admiration rather than condemnation. "Yes, it is," Copper acknowledged without flinching. "And it will likely result in criminal charges against me once the railroad realizes what I've done. But these documents prove a pattern of coordinated manipulation that affects every family in this room." Clara felt proud watching him stand before their community, sacrificing his own security for the chance to level the playing field. This was the man she had fallen in love with years ago, the one whose sense of justice had been temporarily buried beneath ambition and fear, but never truly lost. "What exactly do the documents prove?" Clara asked, though she suspected she already knew. The answer, that the railroad has been planning this land grab for over 18 months, coordinating with banks and suppliers to create artificial financial pressure. That they've been using foreclosure proceedings as a weapon to acquire property below market value. And that they've been lying about their timeline and route requirements to prevent organized resistance. The hall erupted in angry voices as families processed the implications of systematic manipulation. Clara watched neighbors, who had blamed themselves for financial failures, realize they had been victims of corporate conspiracy. The shame that had isolated struggling families transformed into righteous anger that could power sustained resistance. "What can we do with this information?" asked Mary Henderson, whose family had already lost their homestead to foreclosure. "My farm is gone, my husband's health is broken, and my children are living in a borrowed room above the general store. How does proof of corruption help us now?" Her question cut through the excitement, reminding everyone that knowledge alone couldn't undo damage already done. Clara rose from her seat, feeling the rustle of her wedding dress and the expectant attention of 50 families looking for leadership she wasn't sure she could provide. "It helps because it gives us the legal foundation to fight back," Clara said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And because it proves that none of us failed. We were all targeted by people who saw our desperation as an opportunity for profit. But fighting back takes money we don't have," Jim Weber pointed out. "Lawyers and court proceedings and expert witnesses. How are we supposed to afford any of that?" Clara looked at Copper, who nodded encouragingly before stepping forward to address the financial obstacles that made justice seem impossible for ordinary people. "I've been working with lawyers in Kansas City and Topeka who specialize in railroad disputes," Copper said. "They're willing to take this case on contingency, meaning they don't get paid unless we win. And the evidence we have is strong enough that they believe victory is probable." "What about compensation for families who've already lost their property?" Mary Henderson pressed. "What about the time and money we've already spent fighting individual battles?" "The legal precedent suggests that if we can prove systematic fraud, the railroad will be required to provide restitution at fair market value, plus damages for the hardship they've caused." Clara watched hope kindle in faces that had carried defeat for months or years. The transformation was remarkable, shoulders straightening, voices growing stronger, the collective energy shifting from desperation to determination. But even as Excitement built in the room. Clara could see the toll this revelation was taking on Copper. He stood straighter than ever, his voice clear and confident. But she could read the tension in his posture and the knowledge that he had irrevocably burned bridges with powerful people who would not forgive his betrayal. "There's something else you need to understand," Copper continued, his tone growing more serious. "Fighting this battle means taking on opponents with virtually unlimited resources and political connections. They will use every legal tactic available to delay and discourage us. They will attack our credibility, our finances, our personal lives. And they will specifically target anyone they see as a leader in the resistance." His gaze found Clara's. As he spoke, and she understood that he was warning her as much as informing the crowd. Stepping forward as a spokesperson for their cause would make her a target for retaliation that could affect Daisy as well as herself. How long could the legal process take? Asked Eleanor Patterson. Months, certainly. Possibly years if they appeal every decision. Copper's honesty was both refreshing and sobering. And there's no guarantee of success, despite the strength of our evidence. Powerful interests have ways of influencing outcomes that go beyond what happens in courtrooms. The hall grew quiet as people absorbed the reality of what they were considering. This wasn't just about filing a lawsuit or presenting evidence. It was about sustaining a long-term battle against opponents who could afford to wait them out and wear them down. "So what you're telling us," Mary Anderson said slowly, "is that we can fight. But victory isn't guaranteed. The process will be expensive and exhausting, and some of us will be specifically targeted for punishment." "Yes," Copper replied without hedging, "that's exactly what I'm telling you. And if we don't fight, and the railroad gets everything they want, the precedent is set for similar manipulation in other communities. And families like yours continue to lose their homes to corporate greed disguised as progress." Clara felt the weight of decision settling over the room like evening fog. Every family present would have to choose between accepting defeat and risking everything on a battle they might lose. Some had already lost so much that they had little left to risk. Others, like Clara, still had something to protect, but faced the terrifying possibility of losing even more. "I have a question." Daisy's clear voice cut through the adult deliberations, and Clara felt every eye in the room turn toward her daughter. "If the railroad people are lying and stealing, why don't the sheriff and the judge make them stop?" The innocent question highlighted the uncomfortable truth that many adults had been reluctant to voice. The legal system that was supposed to protect ordinary citizens often served the interests of those with money and influence. "Sometimes, sweet pea," Clara said gently, "sheriffs and judges are influenced by people who have more power than they should. And sometimes good people have to work extra hard to make sure justice happens." "Like David fighting Goliath?" "Exactly like that." Daisy nodded with the satisfied air of someone who understood the essential nature of the conflict. Her simple question had crystallized what they were really facing, not just a legal dispute or financial crisis, but a fundamental battle between justice and corruption, between community and corporate power. Clara stood again, feeling the collective attention of the room focus on her like sunlight through a magnifying glass. The moment had come to decide whether they would surrender to overwhelming odds or risk everything on the chance that truth and determination could triumph over money and manipulation. The new deed to the Harper homestead lay crisp and official on Clara's kitchen table, its fresh ink still drying in the morning sunlight that streamed through windows Thomas had installed with his own hands. The document represented more than legal ownership. It symbolized the victory of community solidarity over corporate manipulation, the triumph of truth over systematic deception. 3 months had passed since the night at the church when 50 families decided to risk everything on a legal battle they weren't sure they could win. The fight had been every bit as brutal as Copper had warned, filled with delays, intimidation tactics, and legal maneuvers designed to exhaust their resources and resolve. But they had persevered, sustained by the evidence Copper had provided and the legal expertise of attorneys who believed justice was worth pursuing regardless of the odds. Breakthrough had come when a federal judge ruled that the railroads' coordination with local banks constituted fraud, invalidating all foreclosure proceedings that had been accelerated through artificial financial pressure. Not only were the pending foreclosures dismissed, but families who had already lost their property were entitled to restitution and compensation for their suffering. "It's really over?" Daisy asked, tracing the deed's official seal with one careful finger. "The mean railroad people can't take our house anymore?" "It's really over, sweet pea." Clara's voice carried wonder alongside relief. "We get to stay right here for as long as we want. And Copper gets to stay too?" Clara felt her cheeks warm at her daughter's innocent question. The past months had brought her and Copper closer together as they navigated the legal battle and its emotional demands. But they had been careful to focus on practical concerns rather than exploring the romantic possibilities that Thomas's letters had revealed. "Copper can stay as long as he wants to," Clara said carefully. "This is his home too, if he chooses to make it one." Through the window, she could see Copper working in what would soon be their expanded vegetable garden. The legal victory had come with substantial financial compensation, enough to pay off all debts and fund the improvements Thomas had always dreamed of making. More importantly, it had given them the security to plan for a future that extended beyond mere survival. The kitchen door opened to admit Copper himself, his sleeves rolled up and his hands dirty from morning labor. He had thrown himself into physical work with the same intensity he had once brought to business deals, as if trying to prove through sweat and calluses that his commitment to this life was genuine. "The well is coming along nicely," he reported, accepting the cup of coffee Clara offered. "We should have reliable water to the kitchen garden within the week." Thomas would be proud to see his plans finally coming to fruition. "I hope so. I feel like I owe him more than I can ever repay." It was a conversation they had touched on repeatedly without fully exploring. The complex relationship between honoring Thomas's memory and building something new on the foundation he had provided. Clara had come to understand that loving Copper didn't diminish what she had shared with her late husband, just as Thomas's deception didn't negate the genuine affection he had shown her throughout their marriage. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Copper said, his tone growing more serious. "About the future, about what happens now that the immediate crisis is over." Clara's heart began to race, sensing that they were approaching a conversation that would define everything that followed. "What about the future?" "I want to know if you see me as part of it, not just as someone helping with the legal battle or contributing to the household expenses, but as someone you might want to build a life with." The directness of his question was both thrilling and terrifying. Clara had been dancing around the same feelings for months, afraid to trust happiness that seemed too good to be true after so many years of struggle and disappointment. "Copper, before you answer, there's something else you need to know." Copper set down his coffee cup and moved closer, his expression urgent. "The railroad situation is resolved, but that doesn't mean I'm out of legal trouble. The documents I stole to build our case, that was still theft, regardless of how noble our motives were." Clara felt her stomach clench with familiar dread. What kind of trouble? The kind that could result in criminal charges, fines, possibly jail time. "My former employers are pursuing prosecution as aggressively as they can, partly for the money, but mostly to discourage other employees from following my example." "How serious is it?" "Serious enough that you need to consider whether you want to tie your future to someone who might be facing significant legal consequences." Copper's voice was steady, but Clara could see the fear beneath his calm exterior. "I don't want you and Daisy to suffer because of choices I made." Clara looked around the kitchen, where she had received the foreclosure notice that had started their entire ordeal, where she had discovered Thomas's letters, where she had planned strategy for battles that had seemed impossible to win. This room had witnessed the worst moments of her adult life, but also some of the best quiet mornings with Daisy, shared meals with Copper, the gradual rebuilding of hope after devastating loss. Copper, do you remember what you told me about patience being another word for faith? Yes, I have faith that we can handle whatever legal troubles come our way, just like we handled the railroad. Together. Clara, I'm not finished. She moved closer, close enough to see the mix of hope and uncertainty in his eyes. I have faith that Thomas's blessing on our relationship was genuine, that he truly wanted me to have the chance to discover what might have been. And I have faith that some chances are worth taking, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. What are you saying? Clara reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of whiskers and the warmth of skin that spoke of outdoor labor and honest work. I'm saying that I love you, Copper Callahan. I never stopped loving you, even when I thought you had abandoned me. And I want to build a future with you, whatever that future holds. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative with 15 years of separation and uncertainty, but it deepened as they both realized that this moment represented not just reconciliation, but new beginning. Not just the healing of old wounds, but the creation of something entirely fresh. When they broke apart, Clara saw tears in Copper's eyes that matched her own. Are you sure about this? About taking on my legal troubles, and whatever scandal might follow. I'm sure that I've spent too many years being afraid of happiness. I'm sure that Daisy deserves to see what love looks like when it's brave enough to fight for itself. And I'm sure that whatever challenges we face, we're stronger together than apart. Mama? Copper? Daisy's voice came from the doorway, where she stood watching them with the bright intelligence that made her both joy and challenge as a daughter. Are you going to get married? Clara and Copper looked at each other, then at the little girl, who had become the bridge between their past and future. What would you think about that, Sweet Pea? I think it would make us a real family, like the ones in my storybooks. And I think Daddy would be happy that you found someone to take care of us. The simple wisdom of childhood cut through all the complex emotions and practical concerns that had kept Clara cautious for so long. Daisy was right. Thomas would be happy to know that his wife and daughter were loved and protected, that the home he had built would continue to be a place of warmth and security. Then yes, Clara said, looking at Copper with certainty that felt as solid as the deed on their table. We're going to get married. When? Daisy asked with the practical curiosity that made her conversation so delightful. As soon as the legal requirements can be arranged, Copper said, his voice warm with laughter and relief. Unless your mother needs time to plan something elaborate. Clara thought about the wedding dress hanging in her closet, the one that had given her courage through the community meeting and represented hope for new beginnings. I think simple will be perfect. Family and close friends, nothing fancy. Can I be in the wedding? Daisy asked. Sweet Pea, you're going to be the most important person in the wedding. None of this would be happening without you. What do you mean? Clara knelt down to her daughter's level, smoothing the child's hair with gentle fingers. If you hadn't been brave enough to ask Copper to help us that first day, none of the good things that followed would have happened. You saved our home and brought our family together. Daisy beamed with pride at being credited with such important accomplishments. I knew he was the right person to ask for help. He had kind eyes, even when he was trying to look all businesslike and serious. As the three of them stood in the kitchen, where so many of their important conversations had taken place, Clara felt the pieces of her life finally settling into a pattern that made sense. The struggles of the past months had been painful, but they had also stripped away everything unnecessary, revealing what truly mattered: love, family, community, and the courage to fight for all of them. The new deed on the table represented legal security, but the real victory was standing right here in her kitchen. A man who had risked everything for love, a daughter whose faith had never wavered, and the promise of a future built on honesty rather than fear. "So what happens now?" Copper asked, his arm settling around Clara's waist with the natural ease of someone who belonged there. "Now we start planning a wedding," Clara said, feeling lighter than she had in years. "And a life together. And all the improvements Thomas dreamed of making to this place. The apple orchard? Definitely the apple orchard. And maybe some of those other projects he sketched out in his notebooks. What about the legal troubles I'm facing?" Clara looked at the deed that proved what community solidarity and determined resistance could accomplish against overwhelming odds. "We'll face them together, just like we faced the railroad. And we'll win, because we're fighting for something worth protecting." Outside, the sun climbed higher over the homestead that would continue to be their sanctuary and their foundation. The chickens scratched contentedly in their secure coop, Henrietta maintaining her regal supervision of domestic affairs. The fence posts Copper had repaired stood straight and strong, marking boundaries that would no longer be threatened by corporate greed or financial desperation. But most importantly, the kitchen that had witnessed so much sorrow was now filled with laughter and planning and the kind of hope that could sustain a family through whatever challenges lay ahead. The Harper homestead would remain in Harper hands, and soon it would become the Callahan homestead as well, a place where love had finally learned to triumph over fear, where second chances could heal old wounds, and where a little girl's faith in fairy tale endings had proven absolutely correct. The family portrait photograph captured them in a moment of perfect autumn light, seated on the porch steps where Clara had first read the foreclosure notice that had changed everything. 6 months had passed since their wedding, a simple ceremony, held in the same church where they had organized their resistance against the railroad. Now the camera's lens preserved them as they had become Copper in his work clothes, with dirt under his fingernails, Clara in her everyday dress with flour dusting her apron, and Daisy between them holding the doll that had witnessed their entire journey. The photographer, a traveling artist who documented frontier families, had insisted on formal poses and serious expressions. But when he finally captured the shot they would treasure, all three were laughing at something Daisy had whispered about Henrietta's latest dramatic performance in the chicken coop. The result was a portrait that revealed joy rather than mere dignity, love rather than simple respectability. "That's going to be a beautiful picture," the photographer said, packing his equipment with the careful precision of someone who understood that these images might be the only lasting record of frontier families. "Your children will treasure it someday." Clara felt a flutter of anticipation at the mention of future children. At 38, she wasn't certain another pregnancy was possible, but the hope itself felt like a gift after so many years of merely surviving rather than truly living. The homestead around them bore witness to the transformation that love and security could accomplish. The new well provided reliable water for Clara's expanded kitchen garden, where vegetables grew in neat rows that would have made Thomas proud. The apple orchard Copper had planted that spring showed the first promising signs of taking root, tiny trees that represented faith in a shared future. Most visibly, the house itself had been expanded with a proper parlor and an additional bedroom, built with lumber purchased from the legal settlement rather than salvaged from failed dreams. Every board and nail spoke of prosperity earned through struggle rather than inherited or stolen. "Are you happy, Mama?" Daisy asked as they waved goodbye to the photographer and settled back into their afternoon routine. Clara considered the question seriously, as she always did when her daughter sought understanding of adult emotions. Happiness seemed too simple a word for the complex satisfaction she felt, relief mixed with anticipation, gratitude tempered by awareness of how easily it could all have been lost. "I'm content, sweet pea. Content in a way I haven't been since your daddy first brought me to this place." What's the difference between happy and content? Happy is what you feel in moments when something wonderful happens or when you're having fun. Content is what you feel about your whole life when you know you're exactly where you belong, with exactly the right people. Daisy absorbed this wisdom with the seriousness she brought to all philosophical discussions. I think I'm both happy and content. Is that possible? I think that's the best way to be. Copper emerged from the barn where he had been working on preparations for winter, his face showing the healthy tiredness that came from meaningful labor. The legal troubles he had faced for stealing the railroad documents had been resolved through community pressure and political influence charges dropped in exchange for his testimony and ongoing investigations of corporate corruption. The resolution had taken months and considerable legal expense, but it had also established precedents that would protect other whistleblowers in similar situations. Copper's willingness to sacrifice his career for community welfare had transformed him from successful businessman to respected neighbor, a change that suited him better than any expensive suit ever had. How are the supplies looking for winter? Clara asked, settling into the rhythm of domestic conversation that had become their evening ritual. Good. Better than good, actually. We've got enough feed for the livestock, plenty of wood for heating, and your preserving efforts have filled the pantry beyond anything this place has seen before. It was true. The financial security provided by the legal settlement had allowed Clara to prepare for winter with abundance rather than anxiety. Mason jars lined the shelves with vegetables, fruits, and meat that would sustain them through the coldest months. For the first time in years, she looked forward to winter as a season of rest rather than survival. Mrs. Patterson stopped by while you were working, Clara told Copper. She brought news about the railroad's new route. Good news or bad news? Good news for everyone except the railroad executives. They've been forced to build their spur line through less desirable territory at considerably greater expense. Apparently, our legal victory has encouraged resistance in other communities along their proposed route. Copper nodded with satisfaction. Their fight had accomplished more than saving individual homesteads. It had demonstrated that ordinary people could successfully challenge corporate power when they organized effectively and had access to the truth. Any word about the other families who were affected? The Hendersons are planning to rebuild on their original property next spring. The Webbers have reopened their store and say business is better than ever. Even families who weren't directly involved in the foreclosure proceedings have benefited from the railroad being forced to pay fair compensation for any land they do acquire. As evening settled over the homestead, the three of them gathered in the kitchen for supper, a meal prepared from their own garden and seasoned with the contentment that came from knowing their place at this table was secure. The conversation flowed easily between practical plans and shared memories, weaving the past and future into a tapestry that felt both comfortable and exciting. After Daisy was tucked into bed with her usual story and prayers, Clara and Copper sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the clear autumn sky. The evening air carried scents of harvest and wood smoke, the seasonal markers of successful preparation for winter ahead. Do you ever miss it? Clara asked. The business world? The excitement of big deals and financial success? Copper considered the question while sipping coffee that Clara had brewed strong enough to fuel late-night conversations. I miss the intellectual challenge sometimes, the problem-solving aspects, the strategic thinking. But I don't miss the pressure or the moral compromises or the loneliness. Loneliness? Success can be very isolating when it's built on competition rather than cooperation. I had business associates, but no real friends. Admirers, but no one who knew me well enough to call me on my mistakes. Copper reached for Clara's hand, intertwining their fingers with the easy intimacy that had developed between them. Here, I have partnership, community, purpose that goes beyond personal gain. I wouldn't trade this life for any amount of money. Clara squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work and the steadiness that spoke of genuine commitment. Even when winter gets long and tedious, even when the crops fail, or the animals get sick, or Daisy decides to test every boundary we've set, especially then. Those are the times when having a real family matters most. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds that marked their place in the world wind through prairie grass. Distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of small creatures going about their nocturnal business. Clara thought about the photograph they had taken that afternoon. How it would preserve this moment of perfect balance when everything they had fought for had finally settled into sustainable happiness. Clara, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. What kind of something? The kind that involves making plans for the future, building on what we've established here. Clara felt her pulse quicken with anticipation. Tell me. I've been thinking about expanding our operation. Not just subsistence farming, but developing something that could provide income for other families as well. Maybe a grain cooperative, or a breeding program for quality livestock. The suggestion sparked excitement that surprised Clara with its intensity. For so many years, her dreams had been limited to simple survival, to keeping what they had rather than building something larger. The possibility of creating prosperity that could benefit their entire community felt revolutionary. What would that involve? Investment, planning, probably bringing in partners with complementary skills. It would mean taking risks again, but calculated ones based on community need rather than personal ambition. Clara thought about the other families who had fought alongside them, who were now rebuilding their own lives, but might benefit from shared economic opportunities. When would we start? Next spring, after we've had a full year to establish our own foundation. But I wanted to know if the idea appeals to you before I invest too much time in planning. Copper, I think it's wonderful. Thomas would be proud to see his homestead become the foundation for something that helps rebuild our entire community. As they finally headed inside for the night, Clara paused in the kitchen doorway to look back at the table where so many important conversations had taken place. The deed that secured their ownership lay in a frame on the wall, flanked by Daisy's latest drawings and a photograph of Thomas that reminded them daily of the foundation upon which their new life was built. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, the ongoing work of building a life that honored both past and future. But tonight, Clara felt complete in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. The desperate woman who had stood in this same kitchen reading a foreclosure notice seemed like a character from someone else's story, someone she had compassion for but no longer needed to be. The family portrait photograph would fade with time, its chemicals slowly breaking down until the images became sepia memories. But the love it captured would only grow stronger, nurtured by daily choices to choose trust over fear, cooperation over competition, and hope over the safer alternative of lowered expectations. As Clara turned out the kitchen lamp and followed Copper upstairs to the bedroom they now shared, she carried with her the deep satisfaction of someone who had fought for what mattered and won something more valuable than victory, the chance to build a future worthy of the struggle it had taken. To achieve it, the Harper homestead was secure. The Callahan family was complete, and the little girl who had once whispered desperately to a stranger about loving her mama had been proven absolutely right about the power of hope, courage, and believing that even the most unlikely dreams could come true when people were brave enough to fight for them together.